If you've never seen this animal before, it might look like an alien, a monster, or a creature straight out of a science fiction movie. Sorry to disappoint you, but it's just a plain old salamander. Its scientific name is Ambystoma mexicanum, but it's better known as the axolotl. Scientists have been fascinated by this creature because of its strange evolutionary abnormalities. It's believed to be a close relative of Ambystoma tigrinum, the tiger salamander. In fact, there's a theory that long ago the axolotl was a tiger salamander. They might not look like the same species, but this is what a tiger salamander larva looks like. Pretty similar to the axolotl, right? Young tiger salamander larvae live in the water for several months like tadpoles. As they transition into adulthood, they lose their gills, develop lungs, and transition into terrestrial or land-dwelling salamanders. The axolotl, however, never made its way to land and instead stays in its larval stage all the way through adulthood, living its entire life completely in the water. But how did this happen? First, let's go over some basic evolution. Evolution is the process in which organisms change over time. These changes, often due to environmental pressures, allow an organism to better survive its environment. Some anthropologists might describe it as a simple organism slowly transitioning into a more complex one. Another force that can drive evolution are genetic mutations. This is when an organism is born with an alteration in a gene that's different from other organisms of its type. Mutations sound scary, but they're not always a bad thing. Sometimes a mutation can be beneficial, like when an organism has a mutation that actually helps them survive better in their environment. These mutations are favored by natural selection and can spread to the rest of the population, pushing evolution forwards. Okay, so back to the axolotl, who appears to have stopped evolving completely. This must be some sort of mutation. However, it must have been an advantageous mutation, or else it wouldn't have stuck around. So what is the name for this phenomenon? It's called neoteny. The majority of animals don't stay in their larval stage because they grow into juveniles, become sexually mature, and are then able to reproduce. But in the case of neoteny, in the axolotl, some animals are able to become sexually mature and reproduce while still in the larval stage. As we went over earlier, evolutionary changes don't occur unless they are beneficial in some way. So what benefits do axolotls receive by remaining in their larval stage? Time and energy. Okay, so axolotls aren't literally saving any time as they sexually mature at the same time as their tiger salamander relatives. However, if an axolotl doesn't need to grow out of its larval stage, that is, if it doesn't provide any benefits, what's the point of maturing into an adult salamander? Like the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Axolotls don't develop eyelids like regular salamanders, as there's no need for them in the water. They also have underdeveloped limbs as they don't need to crawl and walk around on land. Food. Food, of course, is critical to a species' survival. Small bodies of water, like the ones axolotls live in, don't always have a hugely abundant food source. This is no problem for the axolotl, though. Larval salamanders don't require as much food as adults. While axolotls do mature into adults, they retain their larval biology, meaning they don't have to eat as much food. This comes in handy when food is scarce. Health and longevity. This might seem weird at first, as larval or juvenile animals are usually much weaker than their adult counterparts. This is because young animals are typically much smaller and more fragile. This isn't quite the case for the axolotl. Baby animals are always growing at a much faster rate than adults. By remaining in a larval stage, adult axolotls can harness this ability of rapid development to their advantage. Axolotls are famous in the scientific community for their astonishing ability to grow back missing limbs. Other animals have been known to do this too. However, there are often issues with limb regrowth, as sometimes the new limbs don't develop quite normally. The axolotl, on the other hand, is able to regrow missing body parts almost identically to its original one, over and over again. There have even been documentations of axolotls successfully regenerating missing pieces of their jaws, spine, brain, and vital organs. This regeneration is fast. Limbs are able to regrow in about a month without any scar tissue. This really increases the survival rate of the axolotl. Alright, so we've gone over some ways of how remaining in a larval stage is beneficial to axolotls, but how and why did this even happen in the first place? After all, this neoteny couldn't have been critical to salamander survival, as the majority of larvae metamorphose into terrestrial salamanders and survive just fine, like the tiger salamander, for example. So, why did some salamanders stay in a larval stage while some didn't? Unfortunately, I can't give you the answer. Scientists have been theorizing and debating for decades over the mysterious evolution, or rather, lack of evolution, of the axolotl. There are a few solid theories, though, and in reality, it's probably a combination of all of them. So here's the first one, thyroxine, or T4. Thyroxine is a hormone produced by the thyroid that plays a significant role in growth and development. Humans have this hormone too. It's believed that axolotls lack the sufficient amount of T4 to grow into adults, making it physically impossible for them to grow out of their larval stage. This theory has countless studies to back it up. In many laboratories, scientists have injected axolotls with T4, and amazingly, these axolotls suddenly began to evolve into full-blown terrestrial salamanders, losing their gills and everything. This still doesn't solve the mystery, though. Tiger salamanders aren't low in T4, so why are axolotls? This brings us to our next theory, iodine. Iodine is an element necessary for the thyroid to produce hormones like T4. Experimenters have exposed axolotls to iodine, and similarly to the T4 injections, the axolotls began to metamorphose. This means that wild axolotls must live in an environment low in iodine, preventing them from growing. Let's go back to where axolotls are found in the wild, Lake Xochimilco in Mexico. Habitats in the Xochimilco lake system are in fact low in iodine. Without this important element, salamanders living in these lakes weren't able to grow out of their larval stage as quickly as larval salamanders living in other bodies of water. Lake Xochimilco plays an important role in our next theory, gene mutation. Because salamanders in this lake were unable to fully develop their lungs and make their way to land, they remained at the bottom of the lake in a small, isolated population. While lack of thyroxine and iodine are solid theories to the axolotl's metamorphic failure, scientists have discovered that there may actually be a gene responsible for neoteny. This was discovered when a tiger salamander was crossbred with an axolotl. This hybrid was then bred with another axolotl. The results? Half of their offspring eventually metamorphosed into terrestrials, while the other half remained in a larval stage. This is evidence that neoteny can be inherited. Specifically, neoteny appears to be a mutation and a recessive allele to the dominant allele of ordinary metamorphosis. The hybrid tiger salamander axolotl carried both the recessive and dominant alleles, which is why, when bred with a pure axolotl, some offspring possess two copies of the recessive trait. So why is this important to Lake Xochimilco? Well, remember, the salamanders living in this lake were pretty much isolated from all other salamanders, resulting in a lot of inbreeding. Let's say one day a salamander was born with a mutation that prevented it from metamorphosing. In any other lake, this wouldn't be a big deal. Natural selection would probably kick in and prevent this mutation from spreading to the rest of the population. But in Lake Xochimilco, where salamanders have no choice but to interbreed, this one salamander could spread its mutation among the entire Xochimilco population. This recessive mutation would eventually be present in several salamanders, heightening the chances of offspring being born with two recessive alleles. If the population remained isolated and continued to interbreed, eventually all of the population will exhibit the mutation of neoteny, which is what appears to have happened to the axolotls in Xochimilco. The theories of thyroxine, iodine, and mutation are all plausible and supported with solid evidence. All three of these factors have likely played a role in the strange evolution of the axolotl, so there's no real way to determine which came first. The concept of evolution seems straightforward and linear, with graphs of lines connecting one species to the next. In reality, though, evolution can't always be boiled down to such a simple pattern or algorithm. The evolutionary paths animals take can be complicated, confusing, and sometimes they seem to make no sense at all. Neoteny has baffled scientists as it appears to go against everything that evolution is. Evolution is supposed to go forwards, not backwards. But the axolotl is proof that sometimes the best way for a species to evolve is actually to devolve. So this is my axolotl. His name's Jeremy. Let me see if I can get him to move for you. Those red kind of hairy things sticking out of his head, those are actually his gills. But what's really cool is he actually has a pair of working lungs. A lot of times you'll hear him swimming to the top of the tank and he'll stick his little head out and go, and you can hear him breathe in. He can breathe water or air depending on what kind of mood he's in.